Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Course Pro. We are many office hours in, I think we're at 9, and fantastic to see so many people still jumping in. Great to see everybody. Today we're going to be going over, it looks like we only have 2 questions, and if there's more, feel free to put them in. Somebody is able to put the link in the chat, that'd be great. If not, I'll get to it when I have a spare moment. And I've got a couple of announcements to make. I've got some assignments to go over, and we're getting to the last stretch. So we'll talk a little bit about upcoming pieces and how to finish the course well and where to go from here. So as usual, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the question doc and I will address them as we go throughout. I've got the old iPad up so I can do some drawing as well. And yeah, excited to chat today. And yeah, let's jump in. So starting off here, we've got question numero uno from Nicole. I just want to check and see if Nicole's on call. Nicole is not on call. So actually, I'm going to skip Nicole's question for now and go to Lindsay's call or Lindsay's question because I know Lindsay's on and I'd rather Nicole be on. So let's jump in. Cool. So I'm just going to make this a little bigger. And ooh, not this one. That is not the Google document we're looking for. This one. Okay, cool. So Lindsay, hey Lindsay, I'm wondering if you share your thoughts on alfalfa and also microclover as cover crops. Property I'm working on is a total blank slate. They are still finishing up the house and likely will only get to planting some trees this summer. Easiest large-scale maintenance strategy for them at this time is running the mower over the land. So ideally with the options below, the land would benefit from the cut and drop and they would have less watering and overall maintenance. They've planned on putting down a ton of grass, but I've talked to them about putting alfalfa in between the shelter belt rows and on the one big empty back section for the zone 1 area close to the house where they want grass. I was thinking to incorporate microclover into the lawn as the combination seems to be better for high traffic. So for everybody who wants to follow along, there's Lindsay's presentation. So if you want to click on that, get refamiliarized with her site. Her site's in Saskatchewan, and in Saskatchewan, it's very flat and usually has quite a bit of water. So on the back side of this property here, we've got a creek. And Lizzie, is it year round or is it ephemeral?
It seems to be ephemeral. We've had some pretty awesome drought years the last couple, and there was like a little bit of moisture in the bottom, but no actual water this year.
Gotcha. Okay. So this usually happens when we have denuding of landscape into the watershed and we end up with just less flow over time. Which is unfortunate because what we want to do is create a situation where this landscape can support that in any way, shape, or form. So Lindsay's question, Lindsay, I'm just going to scroll up to the base map here only because it's a little bit bigger than this one. Here we go. Cool. So we've got a road at the top. We have a dirt driveway that comes in. And if you take a look at any of Lindsay's images in the design site, you can see it's basically scrubland. It's at beginning stages of disturbance moving into succession. So anything within that genetic bank within the soil is being expressed. And so when you have that successional change, that disturbance, basically whatever's in the soil will be expressed. And normally you'll get persistent, prickly, and poisonous pioneers because after big disturbance, usually those other plants can't always make it in or make it through. So I'm just going to scroll back down here and get to your plant survey. Although, you know what, the base map's just as good because it'll allow me to draw on it. There we go. I choose this one. Oh, this doesn't want to respond right away. Okay, cool. And that's okay. Let's see the full map, shall we? All right. That doesn't want to click off either. Okay. So basically, Lindsay, your question is, you're asking about alfalfa in between the shelter belt rows and also in the open area, or just the shelter belt rows?
So the shelter belt alfalfa, and then that sort of back weird little patch, that is like, they probably won't do anything with that for several years. So I was thinking that could go to alfalfa. And then within, like, I've got tree blocks and different things like that slated, but at least right close to the house, like in what I've designated the zone 1, they want for sure lawn. So I was thinking sort of like a micro clover lawn combo right close to the house. And then maybe in like all the rest of the areas, with the exception, we're going to drop a bunch of mulch as like placeholders where their orchard and their garden is going to be as well. Because on a neighboring lot, a couple years ago, they had an arborist dumping like big truckloads of tree mulch. So they've got a lot of that. So we're a lot of it's going to be like placeholder type things for this first year, because their house isn't even done yet.
Gotcha. No, great insights and information. I appreciate that. So yeah, I think alfalfa is a great cover crop. I would say if this were my job, I would be looking at Colin Seiss's perennial pasture cropping work. Seiss is S-E-I-S. He's out of Australia, but his concept is what I would be driving at. So I'd be driving at a multi-species pasture crop that, yes, they could mow, but if it is of high protein, which alfalfa is, if it's nitrogen fixing as alfalfa is, and if you're grazing it or cutting it at the proper time, so that way it releases that nitrogen, which is right at flower bloom. And this is true for all nitrogen fixers. So be it trees or flowers or shrubs, if you cut that material during bloom, it drops nitrogen. So over on the coast, you get a lot of the brooms that are nitrogen fixers, and people really get frustrated with them, but they produce a lot of biomass. And so just working with them and cutting them at the right time can be a huge asset to a site. So what I would take a look at is a multi-crop speciation. So I think alfalfa is a good mix. Are you still getting pretty cold winters in Saskatchewan? Like still getting down to -25, -35, -40, -45? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So barley might be a nice annual, because barley will freeze out in the winter. So if there was a desire to increase nutrition for year 1 or 2, especially around different types of tree systems or all the rest of it, that could be a great way to produce more nutrition. But yeah, I would say your red clovers, your white clovers, your micro clovers, your crimson clovers. I have an amazing periodic table of cover crops, which I don't know if it ever made it into the course material. I don't know if Andrew ever put it in there, but it's from NRCS, and it's really good. Let me just see if I can pull it up here. And if I can, I will put it into the chat. I can give you a sense of, because basically you have to go through and you have to match seasonality, moisture, and use case for the cover crops.
One of the things I'm trying to think about too is just like overall maintenance. So I don't know that they're going to want to be seeding every year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of why clover and alfalfa went to the top of my list.
Totally. And I think that's where taking a look at this resource I just put into the chat, this is the cover periodic table of cover crops, also gives you a sense of the annuals, the perennials, the biannuals, and really working with things like bird's foot trefoil, sainfoin, white clover, sweet clover, because sweet clover is a biannual, so it'll self-seed. And looking at whatever will self-seed, because some of these amaranth will self-seed. What else would I think about for your site? Could go barley, could go oat, could go ryegrass. But what I would do is I do small plots to see how they self-seeded on your site and if they had enough water. And if they didn't, then you would just be doing like 10 meter by 10 meter square. So that way you've got a little test plot. Like, okay, does this work in terms of self-seeding in situation? But yeah, I think medic, bird's foot trefoil, red clover, white clover, sainfoin, alfalfa. Yeah, I would stick to some of those perennials and start working with a mix. And again, do a small area, see how it works on year one. And then if it works out well, or take that information, because once you scale to that entire property, now you're into thousands of dollars, but a small little area can be hundreds of dollars and really give you a lot of information. And then if they do want to keep sheep or goats or what have you, a small flock could do this really well with grazing, but again, not going to
They
be as
don't really
quick.
want animals at all. I definitely
Oh.
talked to them about that, but chickens maybe like year 4 or 5, but that's about
Okay.
it.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think basically when you're taking a look at things like medic, the problem with something like alfalfa is that it's such a high water requirement that you may need to be doing quite a bit. So if you were thinking of doing those tree blocks, swales, trees, and then in the water plume below the swale, you did alfalfa, and then you did a gradient of planting to see where that wetting zone affected. I would see that as being quite useful. And then in between those, doing things like medic or some of the other like low water requirements, which is why I was thinking barley, because it does have a low required water use. And that's a great thing. I should actually just stop share this and share the crop. Yeah. So the way you read this is, I call this my periodic table of cover crops. Was that you've got your grasses, your broadleaf, your grasses on either side. And then you've got your cool season and your warm season. So basically when you can plant and when they're going to do really well, the C4, C3. Then you've got your broadleaf and you've got your legumes. So you've got some of your nitrogen fixers here, and then you've got some of your broadleaf and your grasses. And so from this, you can start to get a sense about what a multi-species pasture crop would look like. And the nice thing is that over time, your perennials are going to, they're going to build water holding capacity. So you may start with your relatively low water requirement. So here we've got our light blue, medium blue, and dark blue. And in the top right-hand corner here, you've got your water requirements. In the top left-hand corner, you've got your growth cycle, annual, biannual, perennial. Bottom right, you've got your plant architecture. Is it upright? Is it upright and spreading? Is it prostrate? Just to give you a sense about what that pasture might look like. And from what you've said, I would be conscientious about water. I would be conscientious about the mowing conversation, and then conscientious about what's already coming up. Because basically doing this, you're probably going to do a light disc or tilth. You're going to do a bit of raking just to smooth everything out. And then you're going to do a seeding and probably a cover. So I'd probably work with these and an experience of these. And then I would reach out to other farms in the area, see who's working with cover crops. Many aren't, but you'll always find the small scale farmers see the value in it, just because when you get to large scale, it's so much harder. And just ask around. That's the other thing I always do when I'm on site, especially if I'm in different places. I'm just asking what cover crops look like, what works, what doesn't, what's planting dates, what is the seeding per acre, because then you'll get a sense about what it's going to be on a per square foot or per square meter. And then you can prorate from there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. There's also a really good termination date cover crop document I've got here. Let me just see if, yeah, it's right below here. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, I've got a bunch of stuff here that's good and is not copyrighted or shared to me by somebody who doesn't want me to share it. So I'll give you guys this too. Put this in the chat. I can go there. And then NRCS termination. And if somebody can take these and put the links underneath the question, that'd be great. So that way the other students can have access to it. Thanks so much. Oh, and thanks so much, Kim, for putting up the question sheet. That's sweet. Any other questions about that, Lindsay?
I'm muted, sorry. Yes, no, that's helpful. I've been trying to sort of narrow down to what I thought would be the most beneficial for them. So that's good. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm just going to check and see if Nicole is on yet. 9. Okay, well, I'll answer a question anyways. So Nicole has a question about terraces, and Nicole's site, we went over it last time. She's got a site near a nursery, and unfortunately she hasn't put her link up here, so we don't have that. But is it easy to terrace one on contour? I'm not quite sure. I know exactly where to implement these to be most useful. Yeah, so normally terraces are on contour. The reason for that is it's easier to work on contour, so on flat ground. So basically what we're doing is we're taking land. So I'm just going to bring up my draw tool. So we're taking land that might be like so, and basically we're doing cuts and fills and cuts and fills and cuts and fills. And so basically A has to equal B. And you'll notice I do this naturally now that all of my terraces are back slope graded. And the reason for that is if you put level on here, like so, you'll see that is not very level. You'll see that this back graded terrace also acts a little bit like a swale in that it will catch and store water. So if rain falls here, it will fill up and it will have a back area that's wetter. And what it does is it creates a microclimate. So this ends up being our wet area, and this ends up being our drier area, and this ends up becoming our hot and dry area. And probably one of the two best examples for terraces at broad scale is the Los Plateau. And John D. Lau of Eco Restoration Camp fame has done a brilliant job documenting that in participation with the Chinese government. And they basically brought back an entire desertified watershed, 2 or 3 valleys. If you ever look at it, take the time to look at it on Google Earth or Google Earth Pro. It's remarkable to watch that change between each one. And those terraces were built up, and some of those terraces did have retaining walls, which is another part of Nicole's question. The other one is Sepp Holzer's Chromaterhof, as well as pretty much every other project he's ever done. So on Sepp's place, I think he has something like 72 ponds, 14,000 trees, 11 to 1,500 meters above sea level, and terraces upon terraces upon terraces. And generally what it looks like is the terraces are flat, and then they come down to a switchback and come down to a switchback and come down to a switchback. So if we're looking at his big farm, if we're taking a look at it in cross section, it's these terraces that pop down, and pop down. And for Nicole's site, that's probably what I would suggest, is working with a terrace step down. Now, the way that Sepp did his is that because they were so big, he ended up doing ponds in them. So he had ponds in each of these terraces, like so. And the way that Sepp does his ponds is he does what's called a Sepp Holzer monk. And so what the monk looks like, I should never draw a single step pond. We should always let everybody know that we do multiple steps because it resists evaporation. So little moment of clarification. So what he does is he'll build out a dock like so, and then he'll put 2 big posts in there. And if you go into my YouTube channel, I have a number of videos when I was out there. Oh my goodness. I imagine it's probably 10 years ago now. And the monk, what ends up happening with the monk here is that the monk is a pipe that comes out and then has an elbow and then has a friction fit. So it's just friction fit. And the reason for that is what you want to be able to do is use this pipe to set water level. So if this pipe was this high, that means the pond would overflow. So what he does is he sets the pond height with the pipe. And the nice thing is you can go and you can turn the pipe left or right, and then you can basically set water level. So this is also what's called a standpipe drain. And a standpipe drain basically sets water level on an entire pond. So this would be, let's use a line, shall we? This would be water level. And then basically this pipe, and we'll just grab the eraser and make that a little bit more realistic. That standpipe would then basically take this water. So let's say the standpipe is, say, here. And then what he does is he takes it down to the next pond and then has a bunch of rocks. So that way, as the water comes out, it doesn't scour and pipe and start to erode that landscape, but it tumbles over the water, or tumbles over the rocks. It aerates. So every time there's a water event, the water from his landscape basically cascades from one pond to the next from his entire landscape. So he'll have water that cascades over here and water that cascades over here and water that cascades over here, to the point to where in his landscape, he has year-round water overflow, and then has fresh flowing water in wooden troughs in multiple places within the property. So that way there's drinking water for animals or for people. It is an exquisite oasis. And couple of books I can recommend by Sepp is the Rebel Farmer. This is a good one. So Rebel Farmer is a great book. Really appreciate that one. Actually, all of his books are great, and I don't read them at all, as you can tell by the spines. That's Sepp Holzer's Permaculture, which is great. That's Desert to Paradise, him talking about how he transforms places from desert to paradise. He goes a lot into Tamara, a really incredible project he worked on. So I would take that as inspiration, Nicole, and work on that. Should the pond straddle over multiple contour lines to feed multiple rows? So what she's talking about is kind of takeoffs. And because water always finds its level, what'll end up happening is you'll have one level of that area. So I'm going to try and quickly sketch out her site here, and I'm on black, so that's okay. So we've got sort of a site like this, and generally our contours are like so, and I think they're actually more like this now that I'm doing it. She's got some trees in the top right-hand corner, and she's thinking about adding more as she's going along. And because this is a nursery, we're trying to get this into production. One of the things that we'll do is we'll create ponds in the draws. So this is called a draw because it has water and it's flowing downhill. Not always terminology that everybody knows. And so on a contour, what we'll do is we'll create a pond, and we don't need the line tool. We need this one. We'll create a pond. And so that pond will be on contour, which means that on the back side of this pond, on the lower hand side of this pond, we'll basically pull out the dirt to create a dam wall, like so. And what I'll normally do is I'll put a swale besides this, just so that way we end up dehydrating this landscape so it comes over into this area, because generally this is a wet area but can have times of drought. And what will end up happening is that all the water above will come down, will hit not only this swale but also the pond. And basically what will happen is what happened here? Back over to draw. The swale, what's going on? Draw, there we go. The swale will fill up the pond, and then as the pond fills up, so say the pond all fills up, then it'll come back out, and normally we'll do an overflow, and you'll have seen this in the material in the course called a level sill spillway. And we'll put the level sill spillway away from the dam itself, because that's where all the energy has gone into. So we want to keep overflow away from this infrastructure. The sizing for the level sill spillway is the square root in meters of the total area that is the watershed. So that square root ends up becoming the length in meters, and a level sill spillway looks like, so we're just keeping up with the conversation. So if this is our swale, and we have it in cross section here, so this swale goes all the way along here, what'll happen is we'll take out a chunk of this and we'll basically level it off, and we'll armor it. So we'll armor with rock, and basically we'll smooth it out so that way in overflow it doesn't even move a blade of grass, because basically we want to keep this water in what's called sheet flow. We don't want it to go to a rill or a runnel or channelization. We want to keep it in sheet flow so that way it can't erode. So in this case, what I would do for Nicole is, if I was working on this project, is I would then have another swale down below, and then another pond, and similarly have one up here. And these could be ephemeral ponds in that we're not worried about them soaking into the landscape. And then below these, what I would do is I would do a major planting of natives. Generally, we want to revegetate valleys kind of without much of a caveat. So like in that other site, we were just taking a look at Lindsay's place. You know, these areas here, which are little tiny valleys, this is where if I was looking at stabilization and slope, I would start to work on. And doing this type of work over time, you can actually increase the amount of water that this site is producing and bringing back into the creek. So it can be a nice triple benefit. And that's the way that I would use this to bring water into these other areas, because the moment you end up putting, let's say, a contour or a swale or a terrace. So let's say we're using dark red for our terraces. Say we do terraces down like this, that terrace itself is going to be a water holding feature. So that water will then stop at that terrace and then start to fill up on the terrace itself. How do I determine, I'm going to clear this so I can see it. How do I determine the new grade based on the slope percentage? Our books suggest having retaining walls to the slope of greater than 25%. But yeah, I don't think she'll need retaining walls for her site. Generally, when I was doing the math for it, basically I would just do cut and fill, cut and fill, cut and fill. That soil will find its own angle of repose. That angle of repose is the angle that any material will find and settle in. So when you take a look at sand, let's say, sand has a shallow angle of repose, because if you put a big pile of sand down, it would have a very shallow angle. If we had, let's say, silt or clay or loam, and let's change color just to make the point, it would have a higher angle of repose. And then clay, especially if you're getting to 40%, you know, if anybody's worked with clay can have an almost vertical angle of repose. So depending on the type of soil you have, you'll find that angle of repose, and then that will then determine what your sloping is. It's too much just to say, if you make a terrace, doesn't matter where, that it only has to be 25% or whatever. You have to be in the field and you have to work with it and actually see it. So it's basically cut and fill. And we'll do this for even walkways. We'll basically take a broad hoe, also called a djembe in Africa, which is basically just a piece of steel on a pipe, and you'll basically pull a row from that slope. So if this is the slope, I'll basically chip away and just make like a little terrace. And we'll do that for walking or for planting, especially if we're in the field and we're just working with hand tools, which is most of the time until you're working at scale. Yeah, so I'm just going to check and see if Nicole did jump on. I do not see her. Okay, so Nicole, hopefully that helps. If you have any other questions, please do let me know. And thanks for the questions. Thanks everybody for the questions. It's awesome to see. And again, feel free if you have a question like in between the weeks and you're like, oh, I want to make sure that I put that to Javin, please do, because we are at number 9 and number 10 is around the corner. So pretty soon we're going to be done. So if you have questions about where to go from next, how to get into work, all those good questions, those are great questions to start to put down. And we might go a little bit longer on that final office hour. So keep that in mind. Any follow-up questions to either of those from anybody as you're watching that and you're thinking, oh, I've got a question about that. Just feel free to unmute yourself or to put it in the.
I have a question about the cover crops.
Yeah, go ahead, Lenny.
I was curious if some of the grasses that are in them, you mentioned to me that grasses can inhibit the growth of trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's grasses in a cover crop and they find their way to those areas of the trees,
Mm-hmm.
Could that have an effect on those?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about grasses, there's kind of two conversations here. One, we've got a savanna-like ecosystem, and the majority of North America climaxes to savanna, which is trees and prairie. And so we see this in Africa, we see this in the Great Plains of North America, we see this a little bit across Australia. And so some of those grasses, some of those true grasses, let's call them prairie grasses, not necessarily Kentucky blue or some of the more domesticated grasses, have grown up to be beneficial relationships with some of those native your native trees. And so with that, I would be cross-referencing the grasses that are in native prairie in that area and seeing which grasses or what family of grasses work well besides trees and which ones do not, or which ones are basically native. From there, I would probably, on those wide open spaces, if those spaces were never meant to have trees, which they should, but clients are clients and they may decide not to do it, I would probably step back from planting grasses close to the trees, really respecting that drip line edge, because grasses are generally allopathic when it comes to trees. That's how I would approach that.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Anybody else have a follow-up question, either about terraces or contours or ponds or cover crops or anything else for that matter? It is an open session.
Hi, Evan.
Hey,
I was still a bit behind, but I was picking when I was creating my polycultures, I was looking for nitrogen fixes, and there was this row that I'm planning of yeah, it's because we're focusing on berries for this, and I had blackberries, raspberries, and then I was kind of yeah, the section below that is like 3 feet high of like support species. So I was thinking like flowers that bloom at the same time, and then
nice.
mixing in the nitrogen fixers because you need like 2 species of that. I remember you mentioned.
Yeah, it's good too.
So I was thinking was lupine, that one, and then summer lupine. But then I saw in a book, I forget the author's name, but I had like a scan of his book, and he said American licorice is a nitrogen fixer.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So that's true. And evening primrose is another one. I wasn't sure about that one though.
I'm not familiar if evening primrose is a nitrogen fixer. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, and yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
No, those are great. Those are great additions. Yeah, I like both of them. I love working with lupines. There's some edible lupines out of Austria, which I've unsuccessfully been trying to grow since I was there 10 years ago. I'm almost out of my stock. But there are some edible lupines. If I was in your position, I would do a pretty exhaustive search of edible lupines and seeing if anybody in your same biome and growing zone has had success. If not, I would go for color. So I would go to have my reds and my yellows. Generally, pollinators are more attracted to reds. So if you are trying to increase pollination, which will increase fruit set, I would go for more reds. Of course, the purples and the yellows and all the rest of it are great for us. And lupines can be aromatic. They're not like overpoweringly aromatic. That's not like you're going to smell them when you walk out the door like lilac, but anything that brings color and beauty to the site is so beautiful. And then I'd probably do a ground cover because lupine, of course, is vertical. I'd probably work with some of the crimson clovers or the white clovers just to get a nice bedding, because again, working in urban environments, that grass is rhizomatous, grows by rhizome, and so it can move in and overpower. So I would probably do that as a stack. So you've got your flowers, you've got that. And then, yeah, American licorice is a great one.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure, like if it really was.
Yeah.
So,
no worries.
Yeah.
Great. You. Thanks for the question. Anybody else? Follow-up question, new question?
I've got a question. So, hello.
Hi.
We have this big field of I think it's canary grass.
Canary reed grass?
Canary reed grass, yeah. And I was thinking of making like a grass-fed garden. I have a scythe and cutting down the grass and making like a thick layer of mulch. And then hopefully it decomposes over time, and then I plant in between the grass. But I'm wondering if there are better grasses to plant in that field, maybe something more native. Maybe a mixture of different grasses, and how to turn a huge field like that. I don't know. I wonder if you have any thoughts.
What's the size of the field?
It's like probably an acre or something. A little bit less than an acre.
Okay. Yeah, so canary reedgrass, by and large, in conventional society, is seen to be an invasive, especially when you get to aquatic environments. And generally, there's a hate on for it. Years ago, I got told an interesting story that it's easy to be at war at anything. Just walk out the door and hate something or dislike something, and you'll be at war for the rest of your life. And it's kind of like walking outside with blinders on, or kind of walking outside like a screen in front of your face. Like ideally, you look at me here and you can only see a bit of my face, and it's similarly, I can only see a little bit out. So I'm never of the ilk of let's demonize the plant, because it's just a plant. It has functionality. And so understanding its functionality and how it works and all the rest of it can be a really useful approach when you're working at this, with the caveat that it's always the burden of the designer for implementation. So if we put something in a landscape that is advantageous and it takes over, that's on us. And it's really important to do due diligence and research to see how canary reedgrass is growing and all the rest of it. Generally, it overtakes other plants. And I would want to, if I was in that situation and if I had a reason to do it, this is the important piece. Is there a reason to do it? Hopefully, this becomes the cautionary tale for all of you in your design process, so that way you don't go through, the bookshelf of permaculture and pull out a Hugelkultur and pull out rainwater retention basin, or pull out, please don't pull out the herb spiral just cuz and put it in your landscape. Please, please, please don't do that. We don't want to become these static, oh, I heard about this thing, the shiny thinginitis, and plop it into a landscape. So we really have to think about use case. What's the reason for this? So if you were transitioning this area, this field over into fodder, right? So you want to run animals on it, or you want to increase the water holding capacity, then I would ask why. Why are you increasing the water holding capacity? Or if you wanted to do alleyway cropping or silvopasture, so you've got trees, rows of trees, and in between you've got the pasture. Everything that I would comment on would be based upon what is that end result. So for you in that field, what are you trying to do with it? Like why are you putting effort into it?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to create like a source for composting, for like creating mulch for gardens.
Okay, so you're looking to create biomass.
Biomass, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, in that case, awesome. You have an acre that's producing biomass, and so basically, what you want to do is you want to scythe it just at flowering. You want to scythe it down at flowering, because you don't necessarily want to spread that seed into your garden. And what I would probably do is year 1 and year 2, and you have to be on it, because basically you're trying to remove the amount of seed in your cut material, because you don't necessarily want to be using all that material directly in your garden, because now you'll have a canary reedgrass garden and it's not going to be enjoyable. So what I would do is I would scythe on a yearly basis 2 or 3 years before I was, especially with canary reedgrass, because it's a power, right? It's got a vigor for life that's hard to match. So I would want to basically be building up compost piles, as you were talking about, windrows. And there are some wonderful, I wonder if I've got my scythe book easily perceivable as I look up. Okay, there's a brilliant scythe book from New Society Publishers. That's where I got it from. So if you're looking for scythe care and process and all the rest of it, highly recommend it. For anybody that has the reason or the inclination to start scything, I can't recommend it more. The ergonomics of a scythe, the meditative process of doing it, the tuning and the skill that you need to maintain that tool, not to mention the innumerable health benefits and just the lack of terrible noise you have to listen to for a weed whacker or a mower. It just rates so high on my list of awesome things to do. I would highly recommend it. But that book will also show you, and there's a couple of YouTubers I used to follow who are scythers. I imagine if you just looked for scything on YouTube, you would find them. There's only 4 of them. How to scythe and how to create rows as you're scything. So basically, as you're cutting down, the way you do it is you throw onto a row, and then as you come on the other side, you throw into the row. So that way, if this is your swath of land, you're throwing into this, and then as you move over to the next section, you swath in this way and swath. So you end up with these rows. And over time, those rows, especially in your situation, I would think if those were going to move into tree areas, that would be a great way to prep the land, because you'd basically be cropping your grass into an area that would decompose. And over time, that grass in that area that it would be piled over top of would have less and less and less ability to grow up, and you'd be primed for tree culture. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. Whenever we find biomass, I never get upset. And a lot of people do. They're like, oh, I've got this invasive. Usually when somebody says invasive, my brain goes biomass. Because it's happened a lot where people get into Scotch broom or blackberries, the Himalayan blackberries. And I just get excited because it's biomass that wants to grow on the site that you can turn into compost, that you can turn into food for something else. So that's how I would go about it. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. And actually, it sparked something else. I was reading about Scotch broom, because there's a bit of Scotch broom here too. And I heard that it's a very powerful nitrogen fixer. And I'm thinking it'd be great for compost, even for mushroom cultivation. I was reading about that. So I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
like this thing people hate can be used, so yeah, it's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's one of the great things about Mollison's. The problem is the solution is that it forces the thinker, it forces the person to go, well, where is this a solution? Like, what is this a solution for? What problem could this be for? And it just puts us from a reactionary, everything's bad and everything's being done to me, to, oh, interesting, nature works in this beautiful, incredible, co-evolutionary way. What has created here? It's like fire. When I did this Facing Fire documentary a couple of years ago that you can find on YouTube, it was so fascinating to learn about the benefits of fire and just the incredible demonization that fire has had over the last 400 years of colonization. It's just like most things with colonization. Thus, I'm going to bring my idea of German forestry to North America and say, oh, it must work perfectly here. And it was just so wrong-minded. And so generally when we're working with some of these things, especially when we're working with something like Scotch broom, you're going to find a lot of hate. But what's interesting is Scotch broom has a narcotic effect within its pollen. And it's the only time researched that the Seattle road rage drops is when the Scotch broom blooms. It's perfectly coincided. Incidences of road rage, accidents, all those pieces drop. So similarly with Scotch broom, you want to cut when the flowers are kind of at their peak, because that's when their nitrogen potential is the highest. Because basically once it goes into seed potential, all that nitrogen is going into seed. So it's also a nice way to manage your Scotch broom as a crop. So this now becomes a supportive, sometimes called a support crop or a chaperone crop. And I might even start to think about, well, what can I plant around my Scotch broom? Like key species, production species, so fruit, things of that nature, fodder, timber crops, etc. But what's interesting about Scotch broom is once you go 30 feet into the forest, it doesn't grow because it needs full sunlight. It is a disturbance plant. It's a pioneer. Very seldom do you go into a forest and see these big Scotch brooms or any Scotch brooms at all. But yet in full sun, you can get like, I've seen 25-foot Scotch brooms that like grow up and fall over and grow up and fall over because they're in an area that has so much nutrition. So yeah, Scotch broom, great point. Monica, back to somebody, Kim, you are amazing. Let's see if this is the right book. But yeah, the Scything Handbook. Thank you so much. Awesome. If somebody's willing to put that into the question doc, that would be beautiful. Yeah, really great book. And there's an amazing scyther on Vancouver Island. He's old Polish or Scandinavian, but I was looking at investing hundreds of dollars into a scythe until I found one at a garage sale that was perfect for $30. That also brings up a good point that I want to point out. Some people may not know this, but whenever I get my list of things I'm looking to either build my own personal skill set, the homestead, or potentially clients, I make a bunch of alerts on Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, Craigslist. If you have a local listing, I will create notifications, reminders for me, so that way they're searching for me. So if somebody puts up a pressure cooker or somebody puts up a whetstone or something like that, I'm finding it right away. We just started the Family Food Security Live program. This is a 7-month program. The permaculture program is great, but it's not a food growing program. And the thing I am most worried about these days is instability, food instability, be it climate, be it health related, be it war. We are seeing decreases of food supply and quality of food. And I've got a goal this year to help 10,000 families become aware of food security and 1,000 families increase their food security. And so we just started this course, 7-month course, 12 sessions. We go through step by step. We've got these amazing spreadsheets that you plug in how many people are in your family, and it pops out exactly how much poundage of each food. And if you're a gardener, it pops out how many seeds to grow that, what's the row footage, how many cans do you need to store it, and how much space to put it up. It's pretty cool. But even in that, and the reason why I'm bringing this up for you folks is, I imagine we're going to see major seed shortages this year, opposed to what we saw last year, which we already saw. And if you haven't started ordering your seeds for this year, I would do so over the next 3 days. I called most of the suppliers over this last week, and they're like, yeah, we're 25 to 40% down. So super, 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 super important to be able to process and be ready for things. Same thing with canning. Anybody who was trying to can in June, definitely in August, there was nothing. And so now is the time to be buying. Now is the time to be folks who are like, spring cleaning, getting rid of my canning jars. Thank you very much. And then buying more lids, or if you're starting to work into reusable lids like Harvest Guard, great time to get into it. I'm getting off on a tangent only because I've seen the trends of what's going on with food security. So anyways, food for thought there. Monica, back to edible lupine. Should it be cut during blooming for nitrogen, or should we keep it until the seeds are ready? No, edible, keep it. Keep the seeds. That's a pulse. It's a lupine pulse that you can now treat like a bean or a pea. I would keep those if you find the edibles, because it's the seeds that are edible. And normally lupines are toxic. So it's one of those things to really be sure of. And so whenever you're testing an edible lupine, I test one and then I see how I am for 24 hours. And then I test 2 or 3 and see how I am for 24 hours, because everybody who plant breeds thinks that they've got the end all be all conversation about these, but it's not always the case. I'm just going to start putting some of these questions over into the question doc.
Actually, it's native to our region here. We are using it as a snack. We are using it as like every time when somebody is drinking a beer or wine, they are putting it on the table like a peanuts. They are putting the lupine and we are eating it. So
yes, I love it. And you're zone 7, 8, 9 around there, right, Monica?
No. We are zone 10, 11.
10, 11. Yeah, right. So this would be the tropical version. Monica, I would love seeds. So let's chat. I'll send you an email, because I've got a number of tropical sites.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay. Anytime.
Great question. Thank you so much. That's so cool to learn. Is it possible to have nitrogen fixers produce too much nitrogen in the soil? No, not that I've seen. It's possible to apply too much synthetic nitrogen. And if you want an amazing book on that, The Alchemy of Air should be a must read. I think my Alchemy of Air went walking. Yeah. Alchemy of Air, if you want to understand how we got to synthetic nitrogen and the problems with it and what peak nitrogen looks like, highly recommend. It's one of those writers that writes in such a compelling way about science. You just love the story, and highly recommend reading The Alchemy of Air. Lindsay, it seems that lots of nitrogen fixing shrubs are perennial in my zone 3, but they also sucker, i.e. dogwood, carragana, buffalo berry, willowwood, sea buckthorn. It says mowing is a good way to keep the suckers in check. Wondering your thoughts on this. Yeah, mowing can work. You can also, so chisel plows are what they're called in common vernacular. So chisel plows are these plows that have a little chisel that comes out there, what's called non-inversion plows. So they don't invert the soil, which generally we want to stick away from. Generally in regenerative agriculture, we're trying to not invert the soil. The reason for this is that, as you've learned in the soil section, the soil food web, the fungals, the bacteria, the protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, all of these, they create a structure of soil, especially the fungals. The fungals create a myceliated web, mycelium being the name for fungi that is below ground. And even, which is amazing, the caps that we see, or the fruiting bodies, they're made up of mycelium. They're just compressed. So if you ever take a mushroom and you pull it, you can see it's quite stringy. That's mycelium. So you don't want to invert that. So one of the ways to do that is to use a chisel plow, especially if you also have compaction. And if you have compaction, you may want to take a look at this. And so basically it's like a fighter jet chevron, and basically it goes through the soil and it lifts and it shears the soil. And that can be a really useful tool to keeping spreading forest in check. If you come on the side of a forest, so if this is our forest here, and you come along and you chisel plow, P.A. Yeoman's keyline plow is also technically a chisel plow, because basically it'll cut the roots or cut the suckers. So that can be a really easy way of doing it instead of mowing, because anything that grows by sucker, it also grows by rhizome. And so if you keep cutting, it'll build up this root structure that'll just keep going out till it finds a place that it pops up. So cutting the roots, it can actually be more beneficial than just mowing the top. Great question. I'm just going to copy a bunch of these into the Q&A. And then Lindsay. Great questions, everybody. It's fun. Can you purchase just the spreadsheet? Great question. I will chat with my co-instructor. Feel free to reach back out and ask me that question again. There's a number of spreadsheets, so we'd have to really think about it, because the way the course works, they're so integrated. So there's two options. You can do the live course, or you can also do the DIY course. There's two options. The live is us walking you through the whole process. And then the DIY course is for those that just want the tools and the process and all the rest of it. And I'd probably recommend that, because there's so much material that goes with something like the with that spreadsheet. So I don't know if the spreadsheet would be as useful to you. Let me just see if I can grab the yeah. So here's the live course link. And then here's the DIY course link, which is also at the bottom of the live. I'm really into food security, and I can tell you Natalie's resources dramatically improved my food security at a level I was surprised at. So Natalie's an Indigenous off-grid homesteader and farmer. She also teaches traditional Métis skills. Métis are the First Nations that initially integrated with the French Canadians, normally around Manitoba and the Red River. Okay, cool. Any other questions on chat? Nope. Any other questions in question doc? Nope. Okay, cool. So a couple things I want to get into. I'm just going to make the announcements first, because we're kind of getting close to edge. So this Wednesday, a colleague and friend of mine, protege of Sepp Holzer, Zach Weiss, is launching Water Stories. And it is a community for those of us that are keen on watershed restoration, water cycling, looking at developing skill within watershed restoration. And so he's doing a big launch. He's launching some really great videos, short little videos and long videos, short videos about the watershed cycle as it needs to be, the destroyed watershed cycle, and what a renewed watershed cycle might look like. And I had a chance to actually work a little bit on the videos, and they're super fun and great. The animations are amazing. There's two posts, so one in the one at 11 and one at 5. And if you want to get a sneak peek of those animations, go to waterstories.com. Also, Zach and I are teaming up to do a Hugelkultur course. And while, yes, you dig a hole and bury wood, I tell you, after doing this now for close to 12 years, there are so many tips and tricks to do Hugelkultur right. So Zach and I are currently just seeing if anybody's interested to do a course. It would be 2 sessions. We'd go into with the history of Hugelkultur. Why do we use them? How are they built? What can they accomplish? How to avoid what's called the biodiversity bonfire. And then in context, how to adapt to different climates, soil types, and regions. where do hugelkultures make sense? Where do they don't? We're going to do case studies, some of hugelkultures that are kilometers long, miles long, some that are backyard, some that are pot culture, tips and tricks and dispelling myths. This is the link for folks. If you're interested in the course, it'd be great to see if there's enough interest to run it. And those are my announcements. Cool. So I wanted to get into 2 great examples of the plant design. And I wanted to pull out a couple of things for your upcoming design work, because there's some great pieces that both Monica and Nicole picked up that I wanted to pass along, and some things that I thought that they could improve upon that I think would be useful. So if you're not familiar with Monica's site and design, she's in Lebanon. And in all things, we want it to be simple. We want the reader, the viewer, to look at this and go, oh, I get exactly what's going on. And she's done a couple of great things. She showed us photos. She's given us the original site, and she's given us a bigger. One of the things I said to Monica is, once you have this original site and this specific, you could blow this up a little bit larger. So what I might have done is taken sort of this area and blown it up a little bit larger. It's me nitpicking. It's definitely, there's nothing wrong with what she did here. This is me just nitpicking. Because I can. Compass rose, never skew your compass rose, never skew the setting of it. And while I love this so much, what I was missing was a legend where the different colors here could match. And so even if she did an outline on these circles to show the correlation of where these were here, that would have been great. But if you notice, this is subtle, and this is such a beautiful thing she did. The background color of each of these actually corresponds to these different areas on the site. So she's really given us that area concept visually, which is stunning. It's definitely a visual language that's really quite beautiful. And so what I might have done here is I might have put in the name of the trees actually underneath each of these, and then done the ground covers below, and then given it a bit of coloration just so that way it was more relatable. But just stunning work. The cross section as well, A to A, B to B. Again, if you do A to A or B to B, you do have to put a little apostrophe on the second one, just so that way we know which A is first and which A is second. If you don't do A, B, B, C, and I recommend doing A, if you're doing multiples, A apostrophe, B, B apostrophe. So she's really shown us the pathways, the swales, the different plants again, really giving us that sense. And again, she's doing that same color coding, which is just so remarkable. Really brilliant work. Again, nitpicking, I probably would have put the lines that are going down to these plants behind each of these. You can see them in front. But once you get something that's so visually stunning like this, you really want to be just tuning it even more so. Also, her matrix was just brilliant and all well put together. So that was just remarkable. So hats off to Monica. And just really good work. Could use a legend, great plant selection, accounted for irrigation, installation, and passive water harvesting. Really want you folks to think about that. And again, super important. I will say this to every single one of you on the video feedback. Don't make me do it. If you are holding on to water, you have to show me where the overflow will go. You have to count for overflow. When you're taking, 100,000 liters off a roof and you're putting it into a 1,000-liter tote, it'll have an overflow. You have to show me where that'll go. Don't make a problem with your overflow. Really think about that processing. So Nicole also had some great work this past week. So I wanted to bring that up. For everybody that has to leave right at 11, go for it. We're going to go a little bit longer only because I've got a few things I want to chat about in terms of the upcoming presentations and the upcoming work, because we've got that final session coming. So here we've got a really well laid out, and I just love the plant legends. It's so easy to read, not just circles, but like exactly what I'm looking for. I love this. It's so easy. You could trip and fall and still read this legend. She brought in the grayscale legend, and you'll notice that you can still really address what you're seeing here. And this is what's so nice about bringing in the grayscale and why we ask you to do it in the base map. You might have been in that base map assignment being like, why do they want us to do this? Well, we've thought about it and it's important. So this is a great piece, really brings in that conversation. And she's really given us plant speciation. She's done the full design process, which is great, because the more you do that full design process, the more feedback you get, the stronger it gets. Nicole and I worked really, put a lot of effort into our title bar. It's clean, it's quick, it's easy. You barely see it, but it gets you all the information you need. I really like this format. Also in this plant design, she really took a look at these big conversations. Like, what are the big things I want to look at? Japanese knotweed, burn pit. This is the first time I knew that there was a burn pit in this top north corner. And if you've been watching all of our conversations, Nicole's asked a lot of questions. We've had a lot of back and forth, but this is the first time. I'm really excited to know about this. This is great. Then she gets into her cross section. So we've got C, C apostrophe, C, C apostrophe. Now I know exactly where this starts and exactly where this goes. This is brilliant. This really lets me know what's happening. Also, she's brought in the summer and the winter sun. And if you take a look at this, hard to see on white, but she's shown us exactly what these sun angles look like. Now, what I would have done is I would have put this at the top of the tree, not in front of the tree, but the top of the tree. And I would put it on the top of every tree, because that's what doing your solar angles means. You're doing what's called a solar analysis. You're seeing, okay, does this actually work on the backside? And then what would it look like? So I would have done these both. And I think I've shown this before, but I'll do it again. Here's my draw tool. There it is. So what this looks like, and again, I do like using dotted lines, but I don't have that ability here in Zoom. So what that looks like is doing that solar angle. I would not use something this thick. Let's make sure I do this appropriately, because people are going to watch this and go, oh, but you did it this way. Always happens. So yeah, so there we go. That would be our summer. That would be our summer. Do not take my angles as truth. I'm doing this freehand. So then all of a sudden you're like, great, these actually work in terms of scope and scale, but generally we're going to start shading out into winter. So you can see that the pivot point, that articulation point, is the top of the tree. And this then lets me know that, yeah, we're going to start shading things out, but not terribly. And then maybe on hers, I might even do equinox, right? I might bring in that equinox and get a sense of what that equinox coloration might be. But this was just so well done, and I so appreciate the level of detail she did in this. Then she did a second and a third cross section. Now, this for me is, if you're talking about moving to a design level where you're able to give people your design, this tells you everything you want. You're really seeing the aspects here. There's a couple things that I questioned where she gave me the slope of 9%. Well, she's talking this slope, or this slope. So normally what I would do is I would put the slope on each incline change to show the different incline changes and show where that was. She's also put human for scale, which I highly recommend doing in your cross section and in your plan designs, really showing us what that looks like. And also she went deep into the interrelationship and the irrigation. Once you're into the design conversation, just making a beautiful base map, giving it to a client and saying, good luck with the watering, isn't good enough. If we're going to do this work professionally, we need to be able to show people, okay, how are you going to maintain it? How are you going to access it? I'll say this to probably some of you, you need to be able to access your plantings. So if you're doing your planting designs, and let's go back to her base map. This is very well laid out. There's lots of space to get around, walk around, all the rest of it. But if you start showing me designs that have plantings that are like this, I'm going to ask who exactly is maintaining that, especially if it's not a wildlife planting. So really think about the human and the implement the human's taking. Usually I default to 3-foot pathways for everything outside of vegetable gardens, which are usually like a foot or 18 inches. And then I've got larger pathways in between or at end rows. But basically in this situation, because she's doing cut and come again, because she's working in the nursery, being able to access this, knowing what you're going to access this, is this being accessed with come along, with a 4x4, with an ATV, with just a person. You really want to be able to know that. So these were all really exceptional examples of what was going on. Does anybody have any follow-up questions to that? And again, if anybody has to leave, thanks for staying. It was so great to see everybody. Really looking forward to seeing everybody's next assignments and moving forward with that. And if you do want to, this is something that I don't think we have cleared with the powers that be, but if you want to skip ahead and just start working on your full design and not do that zone 1 design, I'm totally fine with that. So if you want to just spend the next 2 sessions purely for focusing on that full design and you want double feedback, I'm fine with that. We used to do that in a previous iteration of the course, and I think it might be helpful for folks. So any other questions, comments, or queries about these maps? I'm going to go to the chat next and just see if there's anything new.
Yeah, I had a question written on there. If you get a chance to look at it.
Yeah, sure, Tim. Let me just go take a look.
I put it in bold. It's just under the scything handbook.
Ah, there we are. Cool. Do alfalfa crops get sprayed with pesticides and herbicides typically? Yes. What are the tests you would do when assessing previous farmland to see if it's good for developing, growing food on? Are there specific things you would test for? Yes. So I used to have a great list of American labs. I'll find it for you. Let me just make a note here for myself. JKB, action, look for USA lab listing. I should put that on my website one of these days. Then I'm just going to highlight this, make a comment, and then task myself so it comes to my email at Javin. Come on, Google, you can do it. There we go. So I would run it for a contaminant test. Should be about $100 to $200. What you'll do is you'll take aggregate of number spots in the field that you're testing for. And I would specifically ask for things like heavy metals, would ask for things like what's the glyphosate aspect on it. And if you know that your area is currently using certain types of pesticides, then I would also test for those and just see what their percentages were. At the same time, those laboratories, you will do a full, if you ask them, will do a full chemical analysis of your soil. Plus they'll do a texture test. And if it's a good lab, it'll do a fungal to bacterial ratio, which normally you have to send to a soil food web consultant who does microscopy, and they'll have to look it under microscope. But if you can get all those things done, you're probably looking at 250 to 3. And for anybody who's going to be on a site for a long term, highly recommend it, well worth the money. Up in Canada, I use A and L laboratories. Down in the States, I know I've got the list somewhere. I'm not working in the States all the time, so I always have my list, but I will find it for you and I'll post it. So thanks for that question. It's a really good one. You can work with remediation, and the Helianthus family is quite good at that. There's a lot of fungals that are good with it as well. The problem is that they bioaccumulate. So when you bioaccumulate, what do you do with the material after that? Mostly you incinerate it. So generally my recommendation, and this book right here, Earth Repair by Lila Darwish, is a great one to kind of get a scope and a scale. I work with aerated compost extracts and teas. Extracts are normally used for ground. Teas are normally used for foliar application because they have a higher bacterial ratio, and bacteria has a glue aspect to it, so it sticks to leaves. But in terms of extracts, you can brew them in 24 hours or less, sometimes only 2 or 3, because you're just extracting everything from that compost and putting it into the water. Usually you're looking at what's called a bubbler, a pump, which is a diaphragmatic pump. It's not a water pump, so it's not, doesn't push water through, it pushes air through. And basically what you're looking for is getting that water to what looks like, no heat is involved. Remember this, no heat, but looks like a rolling boil. There's so much air coming through that it looks like it's just going nuts. And what you're taking is you're taking really high quality compost using a compost tea bag. You cannot use stockings. You cannot use all of these other things. You have to use a compost tea bag. It's structurally sound. It allows for permutation of microorganisms. And basically you put it in there. You do not feed this, an extract you do not feed. And you basically run the blower, and I use an Eco Plus 5 pump, I think is the one that I use. It's kind of the best pump for doing a 20-gallon barrel. And until you get up to really loving soil science, this is sort of the DIY way of making them, is use that $20 liter barrel. I use a food grade one, the blue ones, food grade that I can rinse out. I know hasn't had anything in it. And then I'll plumb the bottom so that way I can plug in ball valve, turn the ball valve off, but I can plug in my pump, unplug my pump, and then come off. And then, yeah, basically that extract is usually stable for a day or two. and then I'll apply with a backpack sprayer or with a like spray come along on the back of an implement. Up in Canada, we have things like Princess Auto and Lardco, and they have back sprayers that are backpack pumps. Do not buy a backpack pump from the agricultural industry used. It'll have glyphosate in it. Buy them new, or buy them from the forestry industry. So forestry will, or forest fire industry, because they'll be used purely for water. There's no liquid fire retardants that they're currently using. So, and then what else? They can be diluted, 1 to 2, sometimes 1 to 5, but I tend to put them on full strength. Best time to apply is when it's slightly damp or wet, or when you know it's going to be raining, only because those are microorganisms. They need water too. And if you apply them on ground and it's a hot day, they die. So you want them to kind of get washed into soil, and you can't over apply compost extract or tea. So usually a spring, sometimes a summer during a light rain, and a fall is great. Just increase that micro biodiversity. And I know a lot of you in your soil assignments, I said it to almost, the majority of you didn't have aerated compost extracts and teas in your soil plans, but they're so easy to make, and it's so incredible. And if not, search for somebody that's working as a soil, living soil food web consultant or soil food web consultant. They can make compost for you. They can guide you to make compost. We're going to be running a living soil course in the fall with Joe Tobias of Root Shoot. She's an incredible living soil consultant. And if you're interested in that, feel free to just sign up to the newsletter on All Points Design, and we'll let you know when it's happening. But learning how to do that and do that well is really important. How to make good compost is really important, because we're basically re-inoculating our soil with these microbiomes. And so the reason why I gave you all of that is that that is the best way I've seen remediation happen, is having higher numbers of microbiology in the soil food web in contaminated soils, because they have the ability to, through epigenetics, which is year after year after year, which for them is like the life cycle of some of these organisms is days, but because they're constantly breeding and creating more of themselves, they then learn, oh, interesting, this is how we work with glyphosate, and they'll eventually learn how to eat or break it down into its component bits. So
how long does that take?
How years to decades.
Yeah.
most of what we put on this planet is just so going to outlive our scope. So that old conversation that a society grows great when people plant trees of which the shade they won't sit, also applies for society grows great when people start to remediate the soil for which may not be decontaminated in their lifetime. So it takes a while. Mm-hmm. The only other way is to basically bag and fill and put it in somebody else's backyard, which I don't advise. Yeah. So
cool. Then there was one other question on there.
Oh, okay. Of course there was. Two-parter.
Basically, you can.
Who do you know in a warmer climate that is doing a successful permaculture business that I could apprentice under in the winter months? Define warmer.
So I'm in Wisconsin. You can't do a whole lot here. Anywhere that you could do something during, where work could be getting done, planting.
Sure.
Any type of permaculture design business.
Yeah, and you're
where I could get my hands dirty and do a bit of work. And
and you're specifically looking for design or farming or product or value add. Like, what are you looking for?
It could maybe like in the landscape design, like working with clients, homeowners.
For sure. Funny enough, a posting just came up for hatchet and seed contracting out of Victoria. Don't know if you want to find yourself in Canada, but Taylor and Solera of Hatchet and Seed Contracting are amazing working at the small scale. And their tools and processes are completely aligned with everything we're talking about. I used to work with Taylor, and Solera was a teaching assistant once in a PDC I taught. Similarly, you've got permaculture artisans who's almost constantly hiring and looking for apprentices or internships out of Pacific Northwest. The place where he's at he's in Northern California. Never mind, but warm. Ecological artisans is another great one that I know of personally. And then, getting into your Floridas, into your Californias, you're going to be in a place that's going to be warmer into sort of your southern New Mexico if you're looking at dry land. But generally what you'd be looking for is speciations that were generally sort of in the humid. So I might take a look at the top of Florida into the next state above that. I'm gapping on what that next state is, but the North Carolinas, the South Carolinas, the Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Tennessees, Alan Booker of Eldon Bridge is probably one of the smartest people working in this space and works at a very large scale. He might be a neat person for you to reach out to. Design focus. The Foodscaper Summit just happened, and you may want to troll their listings. I think their replay cost is like sub $80 or something. It's pretty affordable. But they just did a food summit. They had a bunch of, like, even if you just took a look at the speaker list, if you didn't want to buy the replays, and just reached out to those folks and asked them kind of generally if they were hiring or if they take on interns. Generally, in terms of taking on interns, you want to show up with more value than you're asking for. Interns are such a landmine. Interns and just bringing people on site and all the rest of it, it just sometimes they take up so much more of your time, and they really don't show up with more value. So really be aware of like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I've done, I'm directed, I know what's going on. Just looking for experience, willing to get to a place to where you don't have to train me to get to a place to where paying me would make sense. This is how I approach all of my mentors. I said, listen, it doesn't make, like, in my mind, I want what you have. And so for you to pay me, for me to learn what you have, just seems so out of integrity and incongruous. So I will show up. I did this with the person who taught me pruning. I showed up to prune and he was like, well, I can't pay you. I'm like, I don't want to be paid. He's like, what do you mean you don't want to be paid? I said, I want to come and learn. And I know it's going to be a pain to teach me. I just want to learn. So would you do that for me? Would you help to teach me? And then if I get to a place where I'm valuable, and the way I term valuable is you don't have to take time to watch me.
Yeah.
Because he's already taken time out of what he would do to like blitz through a tree to teach me. And I do this with anybody who comes up and is like, hey, I want to work with you. It's like, great. If I'm apprenticing, like if I'm training you, that's value to you. That's usually paid by you. So usually I would either pay people for that or I would exchange it for other things at other times. So that way they understood that I wasn't asking for it for free. Because you got to think, somebody who does this full time, the $45, the $65, the $75 they get an hour, they can do what I would do in a tenth of the time. So them taking that time to train me is something that is taking money off the table for them, food off the table for them. So my approach always was like, can I cut firewood for you? So to make up for the fact that you have to spend an hour with me, like, what can I do for you? So just go with that idea to these folks and you will have people excited that you're coming. Because normally it's people with a handout that have become far too entitled within our school system and are just like, well, I deserve to be taught. And it's like, ooh, it's such a turn off for those of us that have been doing this for so long and have really worked really hard to get the skills that we have. And it's just, pay for good education and good advice is what I can say.
Yeah. Cool.
Does that help?
Yeah, for sure. I'll look into those.
Okay, cool. And I'm just going to check and see if any other sidelong questions have snuck in. Okay, cool. All right. So let me, oh, wait a second. Here we go. Noreen has a last minute question. I have lots of overlapping in my design due to the underplanning of the process, but it does look too crowded. Should I cut some things out? Okay. So Noreen, is your question just should you cut things out of your design or can you help clarify that, please?
Yeah, it just means should I take things out of my design? I don't know if you have time to go over it right now.
Yeah.
But I did, a lot of like shrub and ground cover layers, and there's enough, like there's 2 feet to walk around the trees, but I don't know if that's enough.
Okay, great. Awesome. Great question. Okay, let me pull this up. And if anybody else wants to pull it up, it's underneath her list, and then I'm just going to put this in the chat. So if anybody wants to come back to this afterwards from our course, they can. Awesome. Oh, it looks really good. Nice. Let me share screen. Okay, so here we are, Gilbert, Arizona, low desert design. So we've got a couple pieces. This is an urban site, suburban site, but urban in terms of planting around site. And so we're asking the question about, is it too much? Okay, cool. So I'm going to zoom in. So in the front here, pink. Oh, nice. Bergia. Yep. Dwarf bottlebush. Oh, pollinator heaven. Well done. Underneath here, oh yeah, nice. Gatash. Yeah, wonderful. Mint, good planting. Oh, what a beautiful design. Well done. Tulsi, wonderful. Okay, so a couple of things first and foremost. So in terms of comfrey, I tend not to plant any comfrey that isn't a Bocking 14 cultivar variety. And the reason for that is the Bocking 14 is seed sterile. So that means it cannot spread by seed. Comfrey, while it is great and touted as the best thing since sliced bread for so many folks in permaculture, can spread and become dominant in a landscape. So I'd be very careful about bringing in comfrey that's like that. Similarly with mint, I tend to only plant mint in its own pot, and even then it'll come out through the bottom and I'll have to take that out and turn it into more plants. So just be careful about mint as advantageous. And then I just want to see what the PP and the
Oh, sorry. I have it in an Excel sheet out of the thing, but that's the purple leaf plum tree.
Okay.
I didn't put the legend in yet.
Okay. And then the DA is
a dwarf almond.
Dwarf almond, and PM
Is a pomegranate.
Okay, so so it is the pomegranate. Cool. Yeah, so I like this design. Generally, when I'm doing tree guilds, what I'll do is I'll have sort of 3 areas of planting, sort of a trinity area. And the only reason for this is that I do want to get in there, and sometimes, especially with some of these great flowers, you'll want to go in and do cut flowers and bring them into the house, or friends might be by and you want to help give them a sense to help in. So normally what I'll do is I'll do like little, no, that's a little bit too thin. This is a little too low. Let's go here. Let's go. So normally what I'll do is I'll do like little pathways that come into a tree, and that's not a third. Let's do it this way, like so, and then like so. So basically I'll have these little pathways, and then that'll give me my planting areas. So I've got these little planting areas that are like so. And the nice thing about this is that if I do need to get into the tree, especially with a plum, you may want to get in there and do pruning or picking or what have you. And so it's nice to be able to get into that trunk and that canopy. The other thing I really like doing is I like planting in clumps. So I like planting in 3s, or 5s. So sometimes we're in a 5 plant. And the reason for this is the way that it grows up, if you take a look at it visually, is you'll end up with this really cool center and these sides, and it won't look so spaced out. So generally what I like to do around tree guilds, and I'll kind of draw it small here. So here's our tree. Here's our original grade. I'll do one of 2 things. I'll either kind of do something on drip edge and like a small around like this. So just visually ends up looking really beautiful. Okay. Or I'll do a ramp up. So the right-hand side, I'll kind of ramp up to this and just do a large and a small. So that way it kind of ramps up. And the cool thing about this is if you have kids, is this ends up kind of becoming like a little secret area or secret garden where you have one side that's totally screened and you come in from the back. So even on this, what I might do is I might say, well, I can come in on the back and the left-hand side. And because this is the visual corridor of coming in, I might actually get rid of this area, and this might actually be an entire skirt of planting. Let me go back to my drawing tool, where this becomes like a skirt that comes around. And so you end up with like a really cool visual look to it. So it's like the tree in the next story, and it's got a nice piece to it. So I would say in terms of the planting that you've chosen, it's great. In terms of the plants you've chosen and the number, it's fine. I would just group them together a little bit more and make some room for pathways for the purple plum. Any questions about that? I'll move on to the dwarf almond, but
No, that sounds good. But like for the mint, you said that like I just assumed that it would grow around that area just fine as a ground layer, as a ground cover, but would it push out any of the other plants? I don't know if it
can, but not normally. Things like yarrow, it might. Things like hyssop, it won't. Basically, anything that's annual, it'll likely choke out eventually. And so I have a firm rule now in my plantings that mint doesn't go in the ground unless it's in a pot, even if it's in a food forest, because I've seen mint take over too quickly. And something that's so amazing and so incredible and so beautiful can become problematic. So unless I make a specific area, and what I'll do is I'll dig down and I'll put in metal because it's mint. So I'll put it down like a foot and a half, and I'll take sheet metal, corrugated sheet metal, like offcuts for roofs or siding or whatever. And I'll basically put it as a vertical barrier, and I'll make a little area that is my mint garden. It's one of the places I start with people on food security. Let's grow all the mint you need for a year, and then we'll go from there. Plus, I have family members that love mojitos, so I always have a bit of mojito mint, and I actually really like it as a tea mint. So it will grow. It's just a choice. You have to make the choice. It's like, okay, if I plant this, I expect it to spread, and I expect it to crowd out the self-seeding annuals. And so that's a decision you have to make.
Okay. And then as for the brush and comfrey, so I don't think it grows very well in Arizona. I just wanted to try a different nitrogen, but not if you think it will become invasive.
I don't think it will. If you know, I momentarily forgot you were in Arizona. So yeah, I don't think it necessarily will. But again, I've just had so much experience with comfrey that I'm just like a Bocking 14 variety or nothing at all. Because they do spread. And the other thing is if you ever till comfrey, it can grow from 1/4 of an inch roots. So if you ever till and chop it up, you'll have one plant that turns into 1200 or 1400. So just an important thing. And you know, the nitrogen fixing capacity of comfrey is really questionable. So I probably would work at another nitrogen fixer, and I think things like your pink fairy duster are great. Similarly, I think your plum, I would probably work with another type of nitrogen fixer, because yeah, there's a whole story right now if dynamic accumulators are actually a thing. We did a deep dive a couple of years ago and found that there's some controversial research, but I would add a bit more nitrogen fixers here, especially if you're trying to support some of your larger plantings, and probably at either the perennial forb or the perennial shrub level.
Yeah, the only other perennial shrub that I could find was the red bird of paradise, which is already on site,
Right.
but it's a bush. The rest will have to be annual.
Right. Is that what the RB is? Red bird of paradise?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so yeah, so you already have a nitrogen fixer there. Yeah. So no problems. I would check and see if Gumi would do well in your area.
When I looked, it did not.
It did not. Okay, cool. Too dry. Okay. And then any of the other Elaeagnus, like any of the silverberries or any of that, or the wolfberry? No.
Possibly wolfberry, but I don't have good examples in Arizona to try all these things, but I can just experiment.
Yeah, and check out Harvesting Rainwater, Brad Lancaster's website. He has amazing plant lists. Have you seen that yet?
I have. I bought his books. I have to go through them, but yeah, I'll check it out.
I think he actually has plant lists specific on his website, so that might be a great place for you to start.
Okay.
Because he is directly in your area and climate. Cool.
Okay.
Helpful?
Yes, very. Thank you. So
Okay.
much.
Awesome. You're welcome. All right. All right, folks. I'm at the spot now where I really have to get running. So I'll just say, same thing goes for your zone 1 design as went for your plant design. Really do think about access, really do think about water overflow. If there's something that looks weird, make a note about it, like, oh, this is coming, or yeah, I need to do more research on this. Don't leave it for me to comment on. Like, really think through, like, oh, Javin's looking through this. I've had, 8 weeks of his feedback. I'm pretty sure I know it's what he's going to be looking for. Go for simplicity. So if it looks too crowded and you need to pull out details to be like, okay, well, this is what this looks like. Definitely important. And again, if you want to skip the zone 1 assignment and just go and start working on your full assignment, and you want to just submit and just make a note in your submission, just be like, hey, Javin, decided to skip zone 1, doing the full working design. I'll just give you full marks for it. The only reason I say that is I want you to get more experience, and it was built in such a way so that way we're kind of scaling you up. But if you're just like, no, I really want to, work on that full design and work on that full design for whatever, 3 weeks, as opposed to 2, I'm open to that. But just let me know if that's what you want to do. And if not, that's fine too. We'll have that zone 1 design building survey. One of the things I'll say about the building survey before we go is, the point in the building survey is to understand, how did individuals who did not have technology or petroleum, they had technology, they didn't have petroleum. How did individuals who didn't have petroleum use traditional ecological knowledge and live in an area? And so if you're in a place like Arizona, if you're taking a look at some of the Pueblos, they used a lot of thermal mass. And so even that concept, like, oh, they use thermal mass, interesting, or they used olalis, or they used all of these pieces, that should be an indication that even if I'm talking about something and you're like, oh, that's a neat idea, that's you pulling off the permaculture shelf, being, I don't live in Arizona. I don't live in a year-round arid climate. I'm not going to be as familiar with that as you will, or the indigenous individuals who lived on that land for millennia. And so that building survey is really you going, okay, what did they do? How did they bring about conversations? And what can I learn from that? It's not just like, oh, it was a neat idea and we'll see if it can kind of work here at some point. I think some people treat the building survey as a toss away assignment. And I got to tell you, it's a great assignment because it really gives you that sense of the bigger scope, the bigger scale. Like, what did they do? How did they do it? How can I bring that to this scope and scale, and really bring about that conversation? So zonation assignment, chance to go from the plant assignment to the zone 1 assignment. If you do not have a current house, put it to where the new house might be, or where the center of human initiative is. So if people come to a site and that's where they are, generally around that area. If you are thinking about building a building there, make sure to put it into the zone 1 design, even if it's a shed or if it's a place of gathering. Other issues with zone 1, sometimes people don't do that cross section, and it's just like, you really should get experience with cross sections. I know for some of us they're frustrating, but it's important because you want to be able to visually communicate this. And again, I'll say this again and again and again, this course is not a rendering course. We don't expect the renders to be beautiful. We don't need the renders to be beautiful. We need the ideas to be communicated clearly. Circles with dots, beautiful. In contrast, ovals with sticks, beautiful as a tree. Doesn't need to be, at that end degree. Take time after this course to be good at your renders. Really take the time to, like, the work that happens in permaculture, in regenerative land design, is in between the years. It's not what it looks like in terms of on the paper. And you'll find that the more you work on your cognition, especially during this course, and when you have feedback from instructors and students, the better you'll be afterwards. Work on your rendering after the fact. It's really about cognition at this point, and mileage. So sketch out a design for zone 1, be like, okay, what do I like about this? What doesn't really work? Sketch another one. Okay, what do I like about this? What doesn't this work? And I think we talked about this before, take your base map, print it on 4, print 4 of them on an 8.5 by 11, and then sketch it out, or put it on a whiteboard. Or if you're using digital, like, just sketch and sketch and sketch and sketch and sketch and sketch and sketch. And you notice, as I'm saying sketching, I'm talking about pencil, either digital or otherwise, because that's, your brain knows how to work with pencil and paper. It's very hard to iterate on computer in design, in my experience. Some people can do it, but like, I use iPad now and I sketch maybe, I don't know, 25 to 50 designs before I'm comfortable with it, just because I'm constantly sketching. So really play with sketch. Oh,
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I started hand drawing after all these weeks, and now it's like so much easier. It really is. I've already said, I'm glad you said to just maybe skip over the zone 1, because now that I've been starting to hand draw, I'm like starting to get into the final concept just through so many different drawings now.
yeah.
And so I'm glad you said that today, because I was like, oh, I just want to dive right into the last part of this. And
Yeah. Yeah. Good, man. Good. And I say that in like one of the first tutorials. I'm like, here's a digital way of representing, but you should definitely go with hand drawn. And I think everyone sees digital as progressive or modern or like how designers should be. And the work happens on paper. It always has and it always will. So I love that you're saying that. And you know, if I would have thought of it earlier, I would have said this about the zone 1 design, but I'll send a little note to everybody as well, because there's only so many people who are on this, just to let them know, like, yeah. And I'll reach back out to Andrew, because we did do this before, but I think when we split the course between the regular and the pro, we took away some of the optionality of the assignments. And, you know, I just think the more time you have with that final design, the better it's going to be. And remember, it's a final working design. No design that I create, like, these are all big feasibility studies of clients. Like, they're massive. They're like, these are, you know, 3 to 6 months worth of work. And you end up with these like monstrous big maps at the end of it. But all of them are done through rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, and just iteration. So, you know, take the time, play around with things, be willing to fail, have fun failing, do research, play around, bang your head against the table. I'm just telling you the things that happen when you design, to know that you're not alone. And make sure to get sleep at night, because you need that as well. But continue to play. Anything you send to me, even if you're like, hey man, this is rough, I did the building survey, but here's a real, like, I skipped zone 1, here's a really rough, any feedback would be great. Awesome. Like, people should know by now, the reason why for me the points don't matter is because I want you guys to get 100%. And I just had a student in the other course, the other offering of this, go, I told that to some of my friends and they said that it was cheating. We have a broken education system if that's cheating. Like, we want you to be spectacular coming out of this course. So the more you can rinse and repeat, then the more you can walk away with the points just helping to guide you to what you need to do, the better off we are. So anyways, that's a bit of philosophy, but thanks so much for all the questions today. Really great questions, super fun session. We'll have another conversation in 2 weeks' time. Yeah, you're welcome, Noreen. Thanks for the appreciation. I like that. We'll have another conversation in 2 weeks' time, which will be before our final submission. And that'll give us a chance just to review and chat. And then, yeah, if final questions are around the final working design or what's next or where do we go next, start to think about that. Chances are that'll be a longer session. So if you need to budget for an hour and a half, I'd be willing to stay for 2 hours. I just have to check my schedule. We usually do something called Where to From Here, or the permaculture pit at the end of a PDC. And now that we've moved to Zoom conversations, I can do that with you, and it'd be super fun to do something like that. Jamie and I are thinking about building more designer focused courses after this. So little one-offs for folks that are interested. So start to think what you might be interested in. I'll be sending out a survey probably this week just to hear and to suggest what we think people might be interested in, and then also what you might be interested in. And we'll probably do it as just a session by session conversation. Yeah, so food for thought. Water Stories is on Wednesday. Hugelkultur, definitely take a look. And if you would like to be in that course, and have a lovely week, folks. Super fun to talk with everybody, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.